Welcome to the Mighty Decibel's 26th entry into its Discography review series. This episode, I'll be tackling the discography of the controversial and polarizing Kings of Metal, Manowar. So before we begin though, some house cleaning. As usual, we'll attack this chronologically, focusing solely on studio albums, so no live, EP, or compilation releases will be included. And we'll include song snippets from each release to show the change in sound over the years. So an unsuspecting world would be introduced to the muscle and might of Manowar in 1982 with their debut Battle Hymns. So formed by bassist Joey DeMaio and guitarist Ross the Boss, they soon would enlist Donnie Hamzik on drums and Louis Marullo, stage name Eric Adams, on vocals. So with the sound of revved up motorcycles, we're on our way with opener Death Tone, a track that I always likened to Ted Nugent for some reason. I didn't immediately take to this one at first, but it has become a grower over time. The band then switched gears and delivered two straight-up metal scorchers in the form of Metal Days and Fast Taker, before ending the side with a mid-paced headbanger, a slightly less effective track called Shell Shock. So yeah, brilliant side one as an introduction to the band for sure. That said, nobody sounded like this. Bass high in the mix, a sound seemingly old school yet slightly off to the left, topped off by a clearly top-tier singer up front. This is a different beast that you either embraced lustily or pointed and laughed at. So, speaking personally, I was definitely in the former, collecting all of the Manowar records as new releases in the 80s and 90s. So on to side two, and our ears are mapped by the chest-pounding banger Manowar, before the band provide the first in a long line of overblown epics, Dark Avenger, complete with an Orson Welles narration. A little overlong in the storytelling in my opinion, but still a good track. The title track, on the other hand, that closes out the record, is a superior example of a Manowar epic full of builds and emotion. In between these two tracks, unfortunately, is a throwaway 2-minute show-off piece for DeMaio, giving us a speedified bass version of the William Tell Overture. So I have trouble grading this one. On one hand, I've always considered it a 9 out of 10, but in retrospect, as I look back on the track listing and grades for each ditty, it tells me that I should give this a perfect 10. However, I'm going to stick with my 9 out of 10, but consider it a high 9. In 1983, the loincloth-bearing ones, bearing new drummer Scott Columbus, deem it time to pummel the world with their second mission statement, Into Glory Ride. So screaming death to false metal, the band slow it down here, and with extended track times, really stretch out their songwriting. So many push back against this approach, but for me, this new sound was far superior, heavier approach that resonated. In fact, I'd say that side one of Into Glory Ride is the second best side of Manowar ever produced, and it opens with the speedy metal of Warlord, harkening back to the debuts Metal Days and Fast Taker, which immediately grabs your attention. But then the band stretch out with three of their very best songs, the mid-paced banger Secret of Steel, then the call to arms of Gloves of Metal, and finally Manowar's best epic track of all time, Gates of Valhalla, 7 minutes of glorious pummeling metal. On to side two, and we're presented with no less than 3 epic tracks, each surpassing the 6.5 minute mark. So Hatred opens, centered upon a howling vocal performance from Adams. The galloping revelation Death's Angel follows before the 8.5-minute March for Revenge by the Soldiers of Death pounds us into dust, the latter being my second fave Manowar epic. So many a scribe and metal fan mock the band for this release, claiming that Manowar were indeed paradoxically the forerunners of false metal. So me, I absolutely love Into Glory Ride and still reach for this often when I'm in need of recharging my true metal batteries. A fucking classic in my books, a perfect 10 out of 10. Jack Richardson takes over the producer's chair on album number 3, 1984's Hail to England, a tribute to their rabid UK fanbase. So the album cover screams metal, a muscled sword and England flag-waving warrior with a beautiful maiden at his feet setting the stage before even putting needle to plastic. And once you do, hellfire and shit, if this ain't the best side of Manowar ever produced by the bringers of Black Wind, Fire, and Steel. The glorious mid-pace march of Blood of My Enemies gives way to the bass-heavy headbang of Each Dawn I Die. Then the classic Kill with Power takes over with the sing-along refrain of Kill with Power, Die, Die! Before the side ends with a catchy and proud title track, an unquestionable classic side of heavy metal might. Side 2 opens strongly with Army of Immortals, a tribute to their fan base, before giving 3 minutes to DeMaio for yet another unnecessary bass wankfest. The album is then closed off by the only epic track on the album, Bridge of Death, a solid enough 9-minute epic, but one that doesn't match the heights of what was found on Into Glory Ride. So the change in musical approach was met with approval from most metal warriors and critics, preferring the shorter, more focused material and having only to consume one epic track, resulting in increased sales and coverage. Personally, I love both albums, so I was happy to go along for the ride, giving this one a 10 out of 10 ranking as well. That being said, I've always considered Hail as the band's best work, but given the relative inconsistency, perhaps I should be pointing to Into Glory Ride as the top album. But regardless, power metal fans should own both albums, another perfect 10 out of 10. Jack Richardson is joined by Tony Platt as co-producer as the Mighty Foursome return a mere 9 months later, meaning 2 releases in 1984. And lo and behold, side 1 yet again slays, opening with the slow pace pounder All Men Play on 10, followed by the quick-picking Animals. The Norse mythology of Thor next up, with a surprisingly effective and emotional ballad, Mountains. Great stuff. However, the band ran into problems on side 2, leaving an impression that they rushed back into the studio too quickly. So the anthemic title track starts things out well, but that is followed by the speedy but unspectacular The Oath. We then are subjected to yet another DeMaio bass wankfest, And closing out the album is the lone epic Guyana Cult of the Damned, coming across as underbaked and operatic in my opinion. So yeah, the strain of putting out 4 albums in 3 years is starting to show as Sign of the Hammer creates the first minor chink in the Manowar armor. Time for a rest. That said, this is still a very good album. It's just not as lofty as the first 3, so I'll give this one an 8 out of 10. Awakening from their slumber a full 3 years later in 1987, out comes Fighting the World. So the first 3 tracks find the band turning toward a more accessible anthemic entity. The title track, Blow Your Speakers and Carry On, coming across as much more commercial than previous offerings, but surprisingly it works. So the band's power is captured in the mix, meaning that the tracks retain the black wind of old while offering up some MTV relatable material. Side 2, however, has Manowar turning in a more cinematic performance. So it opens with Defender, the album's unsuccessful epic with another Orson Welles narration, is then followed by a 1-minute soundscape as an introduction to the unremarkable Holy War. That is followed by another interlude piece before finishing with the overtop speedster Black Wind, Fire and Steel, the lone good track on the side. So altogether, side 2 comes across as somewhat shoddy attempt at cinematic metal and not really a success to these years. So altogether, a surprisingly inconsistent outing given the 3-year layoff. I'll give this a pedestrian 7 out of 10. The Manly Ones return a year later, seemingly courting controversy and a further splintering of the metal community regarding the band. Firstly, they have the balls to proclaim themselves the Kings of Metal, naming the new release as such. Add to that another over-the-top album cover of a sword-wielding, muscle-bound character, and the unbelievers were already pointing and laughing before even taking a listen. Crack this baby open and the misogyny levels run high with the musically pathetic Pleasure Slave opening with the questionable lyric, "She is waiting to kiss my hand, but she will wait for my command. My chains and collar brought her to her knees. She is now free to please." That is followed by Hail and Kill's tale of rape and pillaging. So on to the music. There's another hedonistic bass wank track, a lot of melodramatic orchestral moments, and worst of all, a 4+ minute narration tale where a father orates a silly fantasy tale to a young son. So this begged the question whether the album was made for the metal stage or for Broadway. No wonder the haters ripped into the band. That said, if you are willing to give this a try, it surprisingly works. The over-the-top speed opener, Wheels of Fire, grabs your attention. The title track and Kingdom Come are both great anthemic sing-alongs. The orchestral The Crown and the Ring soars, and the melodramatic and piano-led Heart of Steel resonates. So it's obvious the band were stretching out their sound, and while I prefer the early days technique, there's no doubt that this change in musical approach is indeed effective given the strength of song and performance. Which brings us to Eric Adams' vocal performance on this. Wow, just wow. Yelping, hitting impossible notes, and pounding his chest. This is one great vocal performance. So yea and verily, I supported Manowar at the time and still do for this brave experiment into cinematic metal milieus. Nobody sounded like this, and it may be a tad cheesy, but they delivered. Hail. I give this an 8 out of 10. Manowar must be fearless or clueless. How else to explain opening their 1992 album, The Triumph of Steel, with a 28-minute conceptual track about the Achilles legend? So it's broken into 8 pieces. They lost me at the 4-minute drum solo smack in the middle. Additionally, the band fall victim to the CD era's biggest fault, overlong albums. This one clocking in at close to an overwrought 70 minutes. So that would be somewhat muted by providing some value within the hour-long, hour-plus package. But here, Manowar have clearly lost the plot. There's way too much time spent on cinematic ventures. If you want to write a movie soundtrack, go ahead and do it, but don't package it as a metal album. Even the attempts at metal come across as derivative of their previous material. The lone anthemic track, Metal Warriors, being plodding rather than chest beating, and the 2 over-the-top speedsters sounding very similar and less successful versions of previous speedy ventures. So yeah, the band make the cardinal sin of taking themselves too seriously, thinking that their shit don't stink, that because their experimentation last album worked, they could push the boundaries further. The result is that they played right into the hands of the haters. I could no longer defend the band, at least not for this atrocity. Oh, and I should mention that Ross the Boss and Scott Columbus were smart enough to abandon ship, replaced here by David Schenkel and Rhino Edwards, respectively. This should come with a warning sticker, steer clear. I give this a 5 out of 10.
Every one of us has heard the call. Brothers of true metal, proud and standing tall. We know the power within us has brought us to this hall. There's magic in the metal. There's magic in us all. Heavy metal.
The creators of Black Wind returned 4 years later with Louder Than Hell. Carl Logan taking over the all-important guitar slot, and drummer Scott Columbus returning to the fold. The band smartly placed 3 straightforward bangers up front, immediately allaying any fears of another made-for-Broadway record like the previous Triumph of Steel. The strong opener, Return of the Warlord, is followed by the anthemic Brothers of Metal, with the mid-paced banger, The Gods Made Heavy Metal, closing out the trio. That said, the band does embrace the cinematic with 2 tracks here, Courage and Today is a Good Day. The former carried by a strong vocal performance, and the latter being the lone duff track on the record, a 9-minute plus waste of space. There's another unnecessary 2-minute showpiece, this time being a guitar shred fest. But given the record's 50-minute total, you still are left with close to 40 minutes of very strong material to digest. So other highlights here include the dangerous sounding number 1, overtop Speedster Outlaw, and one of the Manowar's best tracks ever, the kick-ass closer Power. So yeah, a great bounce-back record for the band, one with great songs, performance, and production, especially appreciating the kick-ass guitar tone of the new member. I give this an 8 out of 10. Undaunted, the aging ones march on, pushing out Warriors of the World 6 years later in 2002. Everything starts out fine with the glorious chest-pounding opener Call to Arms setting the scene. However, the band inexplicably go Broadway for the next 6 tracks in a row for a full 21 minutes. Sure, a few of the songs in this segment are well written and performed. Refer March for Freedom and an amazing Adams vocal performance on Puccini's Nessun Dorma. But this is supposed to be a metal album, damn it. By the time they get to the homage to Dixieland, I'm left giggling at the pretentiousness of it all, and I'm a fan. So that said, the band finished the record with no less than 4 straight-up high-quality bangers in a row as an olive branch, I guess. So the scorecard, 5 A1 chest-pounding Manowar bangers, 1 melodramatic cinematic success, and 1 straight-up opera ditty enhanced by an outstanding vocal. Total premium track time, 33 minutes. On the other hand, we have the disruption of a clearly too long cinematic section weighing the value of this package down. So yeah, a tough grading exercise for this one. I'm going to say that this warrants a 7.5, with a half mark taken off for the temerity in including such a long non-metal section smack dab up front in the package. Another 5-year gap before 2007's Gods of War is delivered by the Metal Warriors. I reviewed this album for Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles magazine when it came out, and I stand by its message, so here it is. Metalheads on heathen, i.e. North American, shores will surely take the self-proclaimed kings of metal to task for this latest transgression. So busy was the band in telling some silly tales of swords, 8-legged steeds, rainbow bridges, and leather cod pieces. Then again, my decoding of the fully encrypted lyric sheet could be incorrect, that they forgot to concentrate on the strength of steel. Once you sort through glorious barbershop, anthemic ballad, horse, rain, etc., sound effects, and never-ending narrative sections, there's a scant 7 of 16 metalized tracks here. And man, one of those, the Die for Metal quote-unquote bonus track, has to be one of the stupidest, cheesiest banal metal tracks since Priest Inane, You've Got Another Thing Coming. Excuse me while I empty my lactose-intolerant bowels. Truth be told, though, Gods of War does include some good, albeit standard, Manowar fare, those being King of Kings, Sons of Odin, and the title track. The problem is, all of these were previously released on the recent, at the time, the Sons of Odin EP, making this album of little value, if not outright redundant, for those who invested in the EP. Bottom line, Manowar have got to stop focusing so much on glorious ascensions to Valhalla and instead start paying attention to the bloodlust of battle that precedes. Then perhaps the black wind of old will blow at full force once again. At the time I gave this a 5.5, which I stand by. This is only marginally better than the atrocious The Triumph of Steel. Pompous, full of self-importance, and ultimately laughable. Another 5 years would go by before the procrastinators deemed us heathens worthy of another blast of black wind, with 2012's The Lord of Steel, Donny Hamzik taking over the drum kit once more with the passing of Scott Columbus in 2011. So thankfully, the bombastic symphonic approach experimented with on the last few albums has been jettisoned in favor of simple old trad power metal. Not only that, but the production is absolutely kick-ass. The bass buzzing and red hot, perfection. So 10 tracks on offer, with 4 of them being A1 Manowar Best Of list worthy. The fast-paced title track opener, the headbanging anthem Mana Warriors, and then late in proceedings we have the headbanging Annihilation and El Gringo, the latter which is the lone track marrying symphonic elements with standard power metal successfully. The other 6 provide sturdy support, none of them being throwaway, with the rumbling Born in a Grave, the anthemic Touch the Sky, and the simple headbang of Expendable being the best of the rest. So it's great to hear the band getting back to basics so late in the game, especially with such a killer production. That said, the songwriting is strong, but not quite up to the classics. So I'm going 7.5, but wouldn't be hard-pressed to up it to an 8 if feeling charitable. So here we are in 2025, a full 13 years since the release of The Lord of Steel, and no word of whether there will be another blast of Studio Manowar or if they will just run out the string playing concerts. And during this period, Logan was ejected from the band after being charged with exploitation of a minor, with Michael Angelo Battio taking over the axe position. Lots of drummers in and out of the band as well during this period. So there you have a discography review of the much-loved and much-hated Manowar, with yours truly falling in the critical former category. So thanks for listening. Check us out at themightydecibel.com. Until next time, take care, eh?